Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, hello, Regis Gilman is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 best cards from the Witchwood. And when I say best here, I don't mean like, oh, this is the most crazy, awesome, powerful, legendary. What I mean are cards that are influential, they're impactful, they're being played in Hearthstone, and popular, prominent decks are utilizing these cards. Now, I do think Witchwood, on average, has been a weaker expansion than some of the past ones we've seen in Hearthstone's lifespan, but nonetheless, there are still, 15, 20 cards that are seeing reasonable amounts of play, and 10 that stand out above the rest because they're defining decks, they're in the very best, highest tier decks in the game, or they're just really, really cool to play and strong. So that said, let's go ahead and talk about the 10 best Witchwood cards. Up first here at the number 10 spot, I have Warpath for Warrior, or as I still like to call it, Forest Fire, the card I predicted pre-Witchwood reveal, and in fact, a card I gave 5 stars as well. So a card that is now showing up in competitive quest/taunt warrior decks, because Warpath, it turns out, is pretty darn fantastic as a flexible removal spell. It also synergizes pretty nicely with a lot of the different enrage or damage taken style minions that warrior likes to use, most namely I'd say Acolyte of Pain in the quest warrior deck. So essentially a removal tool with a little bit of flexibility that can sometimes be used proactively as well. And because of its flexibility, ranging from just being a 2-mana whirlwind to sometimes a 10-mana 5 damage AoE, that means it can work in a pinch as a sort of mana filler, but it can also take up most of a turn and address pretty much everything your opponent has played. So you have this really cool flexible tool that's powerful both for yourself but also to address your opponent's stuff, and it's basically a perfect fit for Quest Warrior, which is a mid to high tier 2 deck in Hearthstone right now. So Warpath just barely made the top 10 here, a lot of competition for this spot, but to me this one stood out the most, and I think it has a lot of upside for the future as well. So this is our number 10 card. Now up next here at the number 9 spot, we have Voodoo Doll, a neutral card, of course. But despite the fact that it's neutral, it's really only being played by 2 classes in Hearthstone at the moment, which are Mage and Warlock, because they can very consistently kill off the Voodoo Doll's 1 health total and lead into other turns. So Mage, of course, really good at doing that with Frost Lich Jaina in particular, because you not only get to destroy something of your opponent's, but you get to turn your Voodoo Doll into a water elemental sometimes as well. And even without Frost Lich Jaina, Mage just has their hero power, which makes it very easy to activate the Voodoo Doll. Warlock can also do that very successfully with things like Defile. Now, Voodoo Doll isn't really being played a ton necessarily in Warlock at the moment, but it's still a great fit. And Warrior is another class that can use Voodoo Doll from time to time, thanks to all their different whirlwind effects. Those are really the only classes that have seen Voodoo Doll in their lists so far, but nonetheless, it's still one of the most popular and prominent cards from the Witchwood across a variety of different decks. Even though, maybe Big Spell Mage isn't the most played deck out there, it is still a tier 2 list that utilizes this card very successfully, and because of those other fringe applications in Warlock, maybe a little bit of Warrior, that means this card just gets a few percentage point bumps here and there for popularity as well, making it one of the most used and I think one of the stronger cards in the Witchwood, landing it at the number 9 spot. Moving on to the number 8 spot here, we have Hinch Clan Thug. Once again a neutral card, but really almost a rogue card specifically. Now, Hinch Clan Thug is one of the top 3 or 4 most popular cards in the Witchwood at any given time, because Odd Rogue is a really, really popular archetype, a very strong tier 2 archetype as well. So you're seeing this card all over the ladder. It has a lot of played popularity. But despite that, it's really only Rogue. There are some other classes here and there that can occasionally toss this thing into a deck and use it. I've seen it in Hunter. It can fit into Druid or Paladin a little bit as well. It's got some applications, but it's almost 100% Rogue. Now, the reason this card's not a little bit higher on the list, because it is really one of the most used and most played in the expansion, is simply because right now it's only really played in that one class. So despite being a neutral card that seems like it could be fairly flexible, this is almost like a class card. And beyond that, this is not necessarily an archetype defining card. Of course, it's incredibly powerful and it snowballs into some enormous leads for odd rogue decks. They just turn it into 5/5s and 6/6s and 7/7s and so on and so forth, and it absolutely destroys you half the time. Obviously, it's great, but it's not the reason that Odd Rogue is a successful deck, which is Baku the Moon Eater. So I gave some preference to other cards ahead on this list that essentially are more defining, or they create decks in and of themselves, whereas the Hinch Clan Thug feels a little bit more like an inclusion as opposed to a reason for a deck to be there. So obviously a strong card, fantastic, one of the best in the expansion, really strong and a very, very powerful Odd Rogue deck. That has earned it the number 8 spot. Moving on to the number 7 spot here, we actually have one of those archetype defining cards with Witching Hour. And Witching Hour is less popular than a card like Hinch Clan Thug. It is not at the very, very tippy top of the played percentage rates for all of the cards in the expansion. But despite that, it has absolutely created a new kind of deck, and in fact, a pretty solid tier 2 deck at that, with Taunt Hadronox Druid. Because of the interaction with Witching Hour that allows you to summon a very, very cheap 3-mana Hadronox, which then you can then follow up with a Carnivorous Cube on, and suddenly you've got a couple nested Hadronox and a giant board full of taunts. That is just an absurdly strong play that makes Taunt Druid a viable deck, and a really, really scary strong deck at that. So Witching Hour has created a tier 2 deck all by itself, and that's awesome, and that's impressive, and that's exactly why it is on this list. It would not be nearly as good of a card without that specific interaction. So yeah, maybe Witching Hour will go away once Hadronox is long forgotten, or that archetype doesn't make any sense any longer, or the meta answers it, or transform effects become prominent. Who really knows? But for now, Witching Hour has been a meta-defining sort of card because it's created a very powerful unidirectional deck, and in fact, the meta often has to shift around decks like that too. So you can't underestimate the influence of a card like Witching Hour. That's why it's the number 7 card on this list. Speaking of cards that have been influential, certainly Shudder Walk here at the number 6 spot is another one of those, and the first legendary here for the list. Now, everybody, of course, remembers the first couple days of the Witchwood where Shudder Walk was literally everywhere on the ranked ladder. It was basically the only thing you played against, and it was absolutely terrible to behold as it just chained infinite battle cries over and 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 over again once more. Clearly, Shudder Walk settled down a little bit in the ensuing weeks of the Witchwood meta, but once the nerfs to things like Spiteful Summoner and Call to Arms and Possessed Lackey rolled around, suddenly Shudder Walk Shaman became a viable deck once again, and it remains a solid playable option in Hearthstone to this very day, because the OTK combo options of Shudder Walk, where you just play Lifedrinkers and you summon a bunch of them and you just generate a million 1-mana Shudder Walks via Grumble, Battle Cries. All of that is really crazy, and it's a great combo/control deck that finds success and has a solid win rate on the ladder as a tier 2 Hearthstone deck. So clearly Shudder Walk has single-handedly created and empowered the Shudder Walk Shaman style of play, and that's exactly why he's on this list. Some might even argue that Shudder Walk deserves a higher spot on the list. I could see that argument being made, but at the end of the day, this still isn't the most popular or prominent deck in Hearthstone. Clearly an influential one, but there are bigger and better cards out there, believe it or not. So Shudder Walk for me lands at the number 6 spot. Moving on to the number 5 spot here, we actually have Shaman's other legendary, and it might surprise people that I put Hagath of the Witch above Shudder Walk on this list, but the reason for that is because Hagath of the Witch is a very prominent card in Even Shaman. And Even Shaman right now is arguably the best or second best deck in Hearthstone. It's a strong tier 1 deck, and it's very popular as well, meaning Hagatha right now is more popular and played more often than even Shudder Walk, her Shaman legendary cousin, so I thought she deserved the nod over Shudder Walk. Now, it is probably true that she hasn't generated an archetype all by herself, but certainly Even Shaman would have a lot more trouble finding the success it has without Hagath of the Witch, because she creates this incredible late game value piece, not only because her Battlecry can do a great job at removing annoying little aggro boards, but because that hero power turning every single minion you play into an additional resource just adds up to enormous value over the course of the game, and it allows you to go long against really control-based and greedy style decks without sacrificing all that much. Suddenly, your even Shaman deck that's generally more aggressively minded can actually play into the late game and outvalue and even out-fatigue really greedy decks. And Hagath by herself allows you to do that, and that is such an important and powerful piece of the deck. It adds this all-new win condition that boosts the deck's win percentage by at least a few points. That, to me, means that Hagath is the more important of the Shaman legendaries, the more influential, and certainly the more played version right now, and that is exactly why she's in the top 5. So now we'll move into the top 4, and the rest of these cards are going to be neutral cards. And I tend to give a little bit of extra emphasis to neutral cards in lists like this, just because they are played across multiple classes, sometimes even multiple archetypes, and therefore they're just more influential. They're cards you see more often, and that flexibility does mean something. Again, this is not like a raw power level measurement here. This is not Vegeta versus Piccolo versus Goku with their power levels, right? We're talking about cards that are influential in Hearthstone. So Rotten Apple Bomb, yes, I'm giving it a higher score or a higher spot on this list than even Hagath. Is it more powerful than Hagath? No, of course not. But more people are playing Rotten Apple Bomb right now in Hearthstone. And specifically, it's being played, of course, in Taunt Druid very successfully, just adding to that taunt pool. Also being played in Taunt Quest Warrior is another taunt body. It turns out it's just a good defensive tool in the mid game that a lot of different decks can use. And that's not it. There are other just control classes slotting this thing in as a great life gain and defensive piece that all control decks essentially need. So clearly, Rotten Apple Bomb is finding a home in a lot of different classes and a lot of different decks. And I love this card. I just like that it's, you know, nice, control, efficient, affordable card at a common. Not many control cards in the history of Hearthstone have been commons, so that's a nice thing to see for budget players that can actually do some slower style play with a card like Rotten Apple Bomb. And just because it is so popular and it's one of the top 3 or 4 cards by played rate in Hearthstone, it's certainly deserving of this list, even though it might seem a little underwhelming or surprising. It's a very good fit for the number 4 spot. So now we're moving into the top 3, and I gotta be honest, I absolutely hate that I'm putting this card at the number 3 spot, and it blows my mind. And if I was being totally subjective, I would never put this card anywhere on this list because I still don't really like Lifedrinker. I have not bought in on Lifedrinker all this time. I think I gave this card 1 star in the reviews. I've never liked it. I don't enjoy playing it. I don't think it fits into decks, and yet here we are. It is one of the most played cards in all of the Witchwood expansion, and people like it, and decks run it, and seemingly they do so successfully. So I am being objective, not subjective. I'm putting my biases aside, and I'm putting Lifedrinker at the number 3 spot. Now, as far as what decks actually run this thing, I think most notably it's included in Shudder Walk Shaman as the thing that enables your OTK, because the battle cry has damage built in, which means if you play enough Lifedrinkers and you repeat your battle cries often enough, eventually Shudder Walk and chained Shudder Walks in particular are going to allow you to kill your opponent. Beyond that, though, really just any sort of face damage deck, any burst deck that's looking to kill their opponent is finding ways to run Lifedrinker. So even things like Tempo Mage, for instance, another popular tier 2 deck in Hearthstone, slot in a Lifedrinker just because it's a 4-mana, deal 3 damage to the opponent's face that also has a body and a heal attached. So it buys them a little bit of time with the heal to find more damage, chips away at their health total, and of course puts a moderately threatening minion on board. I've also seen it in things like Hunter as well. So Lifedrinker, believe it or not, one of the most popular and played cards in Hearthstone. It blows my mind because I still feel like it's just a Nightblade light, and nobody ever liked Nightblade, but clearly it is stronger, it is better. It's working out a little more nicely than I ever expected, so I am going to give Lifedrinker the benefit of the doubt here. It probably is deserving of this top 3 spot, and the numbers don't lie, and people don't play cards that are bad, so obviously something here is working, and much to my disbelief and amazement and horror, Lifedrinker is your number 3 Witchwood card. And then finally moving into the last 2 spots here, I don't think these will surprise anybody. Up first at the number 2 spot here, I have Greymane. One of 2 cards from the Witchwood that emphasize building a deck full of odd or even cost cards respectively. Of course, Greymane on the even side of things. And right now, Greymane most notably being played in 2 distinct decks, Even Shaman and Even Warlock, which both are right at the top of tier lists, particularly with Even Shaman, but Even Warlock is also incredibly competitive. And they are very much meta-defining decks, and of course they only exist because Greymane making their hero power cheaper is a really big deal. With Warlock, it allows them to draw so many cards in the early game, cheating out super fast Mountain Giants and huge Twilight Drakes. With Shaman, it gives them a really consistent, efficient way to load up the board with their hero power, enabling all kinds of wide board strategies like Sea Giants and Flame Tongue Totems and everything else. So works really well with both of those classes. There's also been some people play with it in other environments as well, but right now that stands out. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention that in the pre-nerf meta, even Paladin was far and away the most dominant deck in Hearthstone. If we were in the pre-nerf meta, I would probably give Greymane the number 1 spot. I don't think it's quite as prominent or deserving in the post-nerf meta with the fall from grace of even Paladin, despite having a couple really strong decks. Of course, there's one more card I'm going to put at the number 1 spot. Spoiler alert, it's Baku. So it's no surprise at all that Greymane is here at the number 2 spot. Clearly a super thematic and powerful and defining card in the Witchwood meta. It doesn't get much better than this, but it gets just a tiny little bit better with our number 1 card. And as I teased, that number 1 card is Baku the Moon Eater. And much like Greymane has created a bunch of different decks in Hearthstone, Baku the Moon Eater has done exactly the same. And right now, I would say it also is empowering the best deck in Hearthstone, which is Odd Paladin across all ranks, all regions. Odd Paladin right now has, on average, the highest win rate of any deck in Hearthstone, and everybody who's played against it knows a swarm of dudes, multiple Silverhand recruits every turn is just incredibly good. It is such a powerful thing to do to hit that button without sacrificing any sort of card advantage in the process. And when Paladin has so many good ways to follow up on swarms of dudes, Baku becomes just so fundamentally good. Beyond that, there are a couple other classes and decks that utilize Baku the Moon Eater. I think most notably is Odd Rogue, we talked about a little earlier. That upgraded weapon is really, really good at early game board control, but also really, really good at doing tons of damage, which Odd Rogue likes to do. Beyond that, the upgraded Hunter hero power works pretty well in Odd Hunter. Maybe not quite as competitive as the previous decks mentioned, but nonetheless a scary deck to face when you encounter it on the ladder occasionally. And then we've even seen Odd Warrior pop up from time to time as well. That upgraded armor up, tank up play, just getting you 4 armor every turn, is completely bonkers and super defensive, so sometimes that's used in combination with Quest/Taunt Warrior to great success. So lots of different decks utilizing Baku the Moon Eater, and because of that, and because it has the best deck in the game to its name as well, that's why I gave it the edge here over Greymane. Certainly, they're both amazing. They're far and away above every other card on this list in regards to their competitiveness and influence. So they are very deserving of the number 1 or 2 spot. No matter which one you pick, you can't really go wrong. They're both just absolutely incredible, which I gotta be honest, I'm going to give my props to Blizzard here. I thought these cards would be a little bit underwhelming at first and get better in future expansions as more and more cards filled in the gaps here for even or odd decks. But man, these were both really good right away. Blizzard nailed it. They're 2 centerpieces essentially for the expansion. Both worked out phenomenally. Frankly, they might be too good in the future, so that's something to keep an eye on. But nonetheless, from a thematic, lore standpoint, from a expansion focus standpoint, Blizzard nailed it. Baku and Gin are absolutely fantastic. That's why they're number 2, and Baku in particular, the very best card in all of the Witchwood as far as I'm concerned. And there you have it, folks. That's my top 10 list, the 10 best cards from the Witchwood. Certainly there were a few others that could have made this list. There were, 15, 20 good cards up for debate as far as I'm concerned. And I'm curious, what do you think I got wrong here? What should have been taken off of this list? What should I have replaced it with? What niche card have you found success with so far that has surprised you, that you think more people should be playing? Share all that fun stuff in the comments below. I always love hearing what you guys have to say. But until then, thank you so much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.